From Fairfax, Virginia, this is Out of the Past with Chuck Langdon and Lee Shepard, an in-depth discussion with some of the most fascinating people of our time, many of them with strong area connections. Now, today's Out of the Past.
Welcome to Out of the Past. I'm Chuck Langdon with co-host Lee Shepard. Lee, please introduce our guest.
Thank you, Chuck. Well, perhaps we should change the name of the show from Out of the Past to Into the Present for today's show. Now, we've introduced a lot of famous broadcasters, Washington area broadcasters on this show, but this is the very first time we've ever interviewed a famous webcaster. The website DCRTV is the internet version of the New York Times for the Washington, Baltimore broadcasters. And we're proud to have with us the CEO, the founder, and probably even the janitor of DCRTV, Dave Hughes. Dave, welcome. We're happy to have you.
Thank you very much.
Dave,
Thank you.
Yes.
Great to be here.
Tell us, how did you get attracted to broadcasting, and in particular, reporting on broadcasting?
Well, it all started when I was a kid. Back in the 1960s, I was a little kid and listening to Top 40 radio back in the New Jersey suburbs of Philadelphia. And I got heavily into WFIL radio and WIBG Wibbage, which were the two big Top 40 stations. And the Beatles, the Monkees, all those cool bands, the Grassroots, all that stuff, and all the great DJs and the jingles and all that. And I just became a big fan. And then my dad one day brought home one of those big console color TVs, you know, the kind with the big round picture tube on the front. And he put up an antenna on the roof with a rotor, and I could swing the rotor around, and I could watch the New York stations too, in addition to Philly. And I was watching Soupy Sales and Wonderama, and in Philly we had Sally Starr and a lot of the kiddie show hosts with the cartoon clubs and all that. And I just became totally fascinated with radio and television. To make a long story short, moved down here in 1972 when my dad got transferred. He was working for Xerox at the time. And we moved out, way out to Reston, which was then, you know, way out in the sticks. You know, there was nothing else out there. And it was 1972. I was 14 years old. And just started to really follow the local broadcasting scene here. I transferred my Top 40 radio love over to Ween 1390 out of Arlington, which was, I thought, the coolest station at the time, and the old WPGC, which was 1580 AM, and Wheel in Fairfax, which was a Top 40 station back then, and just kind of brought my love of radio and TV down here. And it kind of puzzled me because I couldn't find radio stations, Top 40 stations in this market that stayed on the air at night. You'd listen to Ween, and at sunset, it just vanished. Right in the middle of the song. They'd be right in the middle of the song and go pop, and then just silence, you know, and you'd hear the static. And I couldn't figure that out because, you know, back out, Reston was so far out back then, and the nighttime signals just didn't cover that far. And it was a few years later that a year later that I suddenly discovered FM. And I realized that WPGC, at least, was also on 95.5, and I could hear the signal there. And then you had WASH, which was a really cool, what they called middle-of-the-road MOR station, full service station with news and everything. It was just a great station. And then I just, you know, went up and down the dial. The old WMOD 98.7, if you remember that, was an oldie station. And I was also doing a lot of AM listening to the old Skywave signals. You know, at night you could hear WCFL out of Chicago and WABC out of New York and WKBW out of Buffalo, all local. You know, the Chicago station sounded different than the Buffalo station, different personalities. My love of radio and television grew.
How did you get the idea to do what you're doing now? You've been doing this for 10 or 12 years.
Yeah, I started DCRTV in 1997. I don't know, the internet came along in the mid-90s, and I decided to put up a website. You know, I was doing some freelance work for various trade publications. I had worked for TV Tech and Radio World in the 80s. They were based in Falls Church, and I covered a lot of broadcasting things. And by the mid-90s, I was thinking it would be fun to kind of just, you know, see what's out there in terms of the internet. So I started a website, which was just personal stuff, and I had a page or two on local broadcasting. And I just put up my memories, basically, of what I had done and what I'd heard. And it seemed like that's the only part of my website that people really cared about. Nobody cared about my other interests. So I decided to just focus on that. And I thought up the name DCRTV for Washington, D.C. Radio and Television. And that was in September of '97. And that's when it officially started. And it's just been growing ever since.
And you update this daily.
Yes.
These stories.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're like one of the only local media sites, and I treat it very much like a news site. We have news updates every day, even holidays and on weekends. We have a mailbag page where people come on and just post all their crazy views and all that. We have a whole nostalgic side to the site where we have tribute pages to local radio and TV greats. We don't just cover radio, we cover television. The whole media. We do newspapers, the Washington Post. I cover Baltimore, so we cover that. We have that whole media market in there too. And then I have other sub-sites that cover the New York, Philadelphia area and the Boston, Hartford, Providence area.
How do you develop the stories?
I have about a dozen different websites that I check. There's some broadcasting trade publications like All Access, the old Radio and Records, which is no longer around. And then there's a lot of TV sites out there. And then I just have a lot of sources. There are a lot of people that work at local radio and TV stations that just love to tell me what's going on.
I was going to say, you keep saying we. We
is me.
That's what I thought.
I'm the royal we, yeah.
You really are a one-man band operation.
It's always just been me, yeah.
You work in your underwear. Maybe you do.
I do. It's really nice to get up in the morning on a snowy morning and realize I only have to walk about 5 steps. That's my commute in the morning. No, people ask me, isn't it a lot of work? And it is work, but to me it's fun. I love doing it. It's my bliss. I love doing it. So I will often wake up at 3 in the morning and can't go back to sleep, and I'll go check the email, and then there's a couple really good emails, and I'll update the website. It's 3:30 in the morning. Yeah, I do that a lot.
Is your audience other broadcasters?
Oh, yeah. We have a lot of people in the broadcasting business, but we also just have a lot of other radio and TV fans. I try to gear the site for everybody. I don't try to make it an industry site. A lot of the sites you see out there are geared to like people in the biz, and I try to make it open to everybody. There's this whole thing in broadcasting where it goes from the television and radio to the public, and there's a one-way kind of street there. And for so many years, that's the way it was. And now, I think with my site and with others like it, we're turning it back, and we're saying, no, wait a minute, it's a two-way street. You can now talk back to the broadcaster. You can tell the radio guy, the TV guy, the newsman what you think. And to some people in the business, they don't like that. They really, there are a few people out there that really take offense at the fact that, hey, they're getting that criticism right back at them. A shock jock can get on the radio now and say something, and in 10 minutes, there's a whole bunch of people shooting back at him saying, wait a minute. There are a lot of people don't like that, and a lot of people like it. I think a lot of the true professional broadcasters who are really in it to listen to the audience like the fact that they get the feedback like that.
And you break a lot of stories.
Yes, we do. Yeah. Yes, I do. Yeah.
But I don't know that you get credit for as many stories as you break.
I find that's maybe the sincerest form of flattery is to get ignored by the competition. We do. I do scoop a lot of things. For example, there was a story just this morning. We're taping this show on, the 16th of January. There was an article this morning on Donnie Simpson, longtime radio guy at WPGC and WKYS before that he's negotiating out of his contract because his radio station's, basically budget cutting like crazy, and he makes a lot of money. Well, I broke that story 3 or 4 days ago on my website, and you know, I had to argue with the guy at the Washington Post to even get a credit in that story. Say, can you please say, you know, hey, at least, you know, admit that we did break the story a couple days ago. And he kind of hemmed and hawed and went, all right, I guess I'll give it to you. So if you open your Washington Post this morning, at the very end, there's a little thing saying, you know, well, this crazy little website broke the story a couple days ago, you know, but you really have to fight for that. The Post, the Baltimore Sun, a lot of the other trade publications, they just like to pretend we're not there.
Well, it may be that soon they won't be there.
Some of them have already gone away. And it's not just me. You know, it's like the Washington Post today has a tremendous amount of competition from other sites like me that cover other areas. I mean, I'm only covering local media news. You know, there are other people covering politics and everything else. So they're getting a lot of competition out there. And, you know, it's just, you know, that's the way it is now. It's a whole different world, and it wouldn't have been possible without the internet.
On your website, you have a category of the top, this year you had the breaking stories of 09.
Right.
And what were some of those that you considered to be the most important?
I think the biggest story of the year is station after station they're laying off people. You know, they're plugging into national shows. You know, it's pretty much the death of local radio. And you're seeing that everywhere, you know. Local personalities, WJFK, for example, a long-time talk station, literally just got rid of so many of their people because they just, you know, they can't afford it anymore. And in this day and age, with the recession, with so much competition from the internet, from webcasters, from other stations, they just can't afford to hire and pay big-name celebrity broadcasters like they used to. Paul
McNell, our guest several weeks ago, said kids don't need radio anymore.
Exactly. They don't need it. You know, there's so many other avenues for them to get their music, especially on the internet, the iPod, the, you know, cable TV, everything else. Yeah.
You know, that's interesting because you list on your website the top, 5 or 6 or 10 stations.
Oh yeah, we have that minute by minute number. Yeah, we get them every week, right?
And number one is WASH.
WASH has been number one the past couple of weeks because of the Christmas music. Yes.
And then WTOP.
WTOP is just an incredible station. The smart thing, and I'll credit Jim Farley, who runs the station. He's the top programmer over there. He saw one of the things he did was to take the station to FM. He said, you know, Washington is an FM market, and it always has been. Ever since the 70s, FM has been king in this market. And he said, you know, put a top, even though it's a talk station. In the old days, FM was just for music. He said, no, we're putting a talk station on FM, got all the frequencies lined up, moved it all over onto FM. Have a nice conversational news station. Don't make it sound too newsy. You know, it's not heavy duty, you know, in your face stuff. Make it kind of friendly sounding. And, you know, it's been a winning station for the last 5 or 6 years. You know, not so much the ratings, but the revenue. I mean, that station, it rivals stations in New York City and LA, which are much larger markets for revenue.
Well, I thought it was interesting because the stations you have, WAMU, WHUR, WETA, only one of them plays music at all, and they're the top stations.
Yes, yeah, that's very true.
So that follows up on the fact that the music, no one's tuning in for the music. Those stations are struggling.
Yes, exactly. And I've talked to a lot of programmers who work at music stations, and they tell me the same thing. They say it's advertisers love younger people to listen, and it's getting harder and harder to get younger people to listen. Period. You know, so more and more stations are going to talk type formats. It's just, you know, it's easier to do it that way. And then a lot of those talk formats are just plugging into the satellite. You know, you look at WMAL, which is one of the top political talkers in the market, and their only local shows are in the morning. They have Grandy and Andy in the morning, and then they have Chris Plant and up before noon, and then the rest of the day from noon all night long till 5 in the next morning is all just plucked off the satellite.
With all this going on, HD radio comes along, and frankly, I know nothing about HD radio, but tell me about that.
Television all went digital. You know, back in June, we all heard all the stuff, and we all flipped over, and you know, now we're getting our signals in digital, and it's beautiful. You know, the pictures are gorgeous. They're widescreen. They're high def. HD radio is just simply digital radio. The problem with HD radio is the system puts the signal in the same band as standard radio. So they're shared. So you basically you have a signal on 101.1, the analog signal in the middle, and then the digital on the sides. And it doesn't work real well. You know, the reception is difficult. If you have an HD radio, you know, for example, a normal station like a major FM station, the signal will go out 50 miles easily. With HD radio, that signal will only go out about 10 miles, 10 or 15 miles. So it's hard to get. Yeah. And the problem with HD radio, even though you can get, you know, a good sounding signal, and even though they can add additional sub-channels, so you can get different, you know, they can maybe make 3 or 4 stations out of one station, it competes with satellite radio. You can get a satellite radio, XM Sirius, and you get 100+ channels with that one little radio. With HD radio, you know, you're basically getting what you already get over the air, plus maybe a couple of 2 or 3 stations additional. That's it, you know.
What's going to happen to Sirius radio, satellite radio?
So far, so good. They merged with XM early last year. I guess the merger took place. So there is basically just one big company now.
Right.
And even when they have a monopoly like they have, they're still having a lot of trouble because they're competing with regular radio, they're competing with the internet, they're competing with cable TV, they're competing with video games and iPods and everything else. So, you know.
It may be a programming problem. Because let's talk about the music again.
Yeah.
WASH was #1 because it had this Christmas format.
Yeah, and even when they don't do Christmas music, they still do well.
But then immediately, oh, they do. Well,
oh yeah, they have adult contemporary.
Well, I was going to say, all the stations are called adult contemporary, and they all sound the same.
They all do.
Why isn't there more of a variety?
Part of the problem is the corporate radio. You know, WASH is owned by Clear Channel. Clear Channel owns thousands of radio stations. They own stations everywhere. You can't go to a major market or even a minor market in this country and half the stations aren't owned by Clear Channel. Richmond, they own stations in D.C., Baltimore, Winchester, Frederick, the Eastern Shore, Philadelphia, New York. They own stations everywhere. And they program it like that. They're all programmed from the corporate central office. There are stations like, if you like WASH, you'll hear a station that sounds exactly the same in Philadelphia and the same in New York. You know, and that's the way it's programmed now. There is no local ownership of stations. You know, it just doesn't exist anymore.
Will it happen again?
I don't see anything happening. No. If you look at our market, we have about 50 radio stations, and of those 50 stations, they're all I'd say about 80% of the listening is done to stations that are owned by one of 4 or 5 companies. Clear Channel owns about 25% of the listening audience in this market. And then you have CBS Radio, which has another about 20%. And then you have Bonneville, Citadel, Radio 1. And then those 5 companies, you know, that's about 80% of the listening audience right there.
Why would WBGC, for example, playing oldies, it had such a popular audience that people were calling in and asking to talk with Goldie and these things.
Yeah.
Very successful, and they just cut it off and go to the contemporary urban again, and they sound like the rest.
Advertisers. You know, radio is programmed for advertisers. The basic game in how do you win the game in this market or any market in radio is to get advertising revenue. You need to program for advertisers. You need to sell ads. You can have a radio station that gets great ratings, but it doesn't sell ads. You know, CBS pulled the plug on Murder, She Wrote a couple of years ago, number of years ago. A top-rated show. The reason? Because it was getting too many older folks listening or watching. And the advertisers didn't want to reach those older folks. They want to reach people in their 20s and 30s. So you could have a radio station. You could put a big band format on an FM station in Washington and get great ratings with it, but it wouldn't sell advertising. That's one of the things Bonneville did. 103.5 used to be WGMS, classical music, always a top 5 station. But Bonneville pulled the plug on it and WTOP on 103.5. Why? Because the advertisers were more likely to buy ads on a news station than they were on a classical music station.
Why 20s and 30s as the target?
You'd have to ask advertisers that. That's what you hear over and over and again.
They buy stuff.
Not necessarily they buy stuff. They're the ones most influenced by advertising.
Oh.
Okay? you know, when you get into your 40s and 50s, you've already chosen the kind of beer you like, the certain kind of car you like. You're not going to change. When you're in your 20s and 30s, you're susceptible to the advertising. And so that's why advertisers realize, and you see that all over, look at cable TV. Every cable TV network is going after that same demographic, either male or female, 20s and 30s, because that's what advertisers want. And you see that same thing all across the radio dial and the television dial too. I mean, you just watch television in the afternoon, channels 4, 5, 7, 9, 20. They're all running the same kind of programming on all of them, you know, because they all have the tabloid talk shows or the court shows or a soap opera, you know. Everybody's doing the same thing over and over again. I would love to see the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, say someday, hey, this corporate radio thing, it's okay, but to a smaller degree. Clear Channel and large companies like this, you can own, say, 1 or 2 stations in a market, and that's it. No, not 7 or 8. You know,
is that the way it used to be, Lee?
Yeah. In the old days, the FCC said you could own 1 AM and 1 FM in a market. So a company like Citadel or Clear Channel or whatever could own stations. They could own stations in every market. You know, they could own hundreds of stations, but only 1 or 2 per market. You know, there was a while here where Clear Channel owned 7 radio stations in the Washington market.
And Washington Post only
8 radio stations.
They only have the 2 radio and.
Yeah, they had to sell WTOP or swap with the Detroit because they had.
There was a period where you had a lot of companies that would own not only an AM and an FM, but a TVer. And originally, the Washington Post owned WTOP FM, which was 96.3, WTOP AM at 1500, and they owned WTOP Television, which was Channel 9. In the 70s, the FCC came down and said, now, we don't like one company owning a TV, an AM, and an FM in a market. So Washington Post said, okay, we'll give away, they gave away the FM station to Howard University, which is now very popular, WHUR, and they traded the TV station with the Detroit News. So the Washington Post company still owns the NBC affiliate in Detroit, WDIV, I believe it's called. And the Detroit News took over WTOP TV. It became WDVM for a while, and then eventually Gannett bought it. And now it's WUSA.
And WHUR is the number 5 in the.
Oh yeah, WHUR is but the one thing that's unique about WHUR is that it is a locally owned station.
Yes.
It's owned by a local university.
Yes.
It's programmed as a commercial station, but it is a local station. Now, they're doing like everybody else. They're filling out their broadcast day with piped-in talent. I think they've got Steve Harvey in the morning now, which he's out of New York, you know, like everybody else is doing. And getting back to Donnie Simpson, that's another thing. What's happening at PGC is, why are we paying Donnie Simpson all this money to do a local radio show in one market where we could get rid of Donnie, just plug into some satellite show from somewhere and pay a lot less?
Now, are you promoting your favorite radio station?
This is the WHFS, back when it was on 102.3 in the 70s and early 80s, was a free-form, locally owned radio station. And, you know, you don't see that anymore today.
No, I remember it very well. It had its fans.
Yes,
like
and then it moved over to 99.1, and then had a whole bunch of different owners over the years. And then it kind of got commercialized, and then CBS bought it, and then it was alt-rock station, and then they pulled the plug on it back in 2005 and put Spanish on the frequency.
It was progressive.
It was called progressive because they let the DJs program it. The DJs could come on and play what they wanted. You know, and today, I guess the format wouldn't work. It wouldn't get the ratings. But, you know, I just used it as kind of like, it would be so nice if we could, maybe someone would just take the chance and say, let's just let the DJ give him his thing again and let him do it. You know, we don't need a computer or a computer down in San Antonio program.
Dave, that's the way we used to do it back in
exactly.
the 50s.
Yeah.
Goodness sakes. Of course, we were limited a little bit. We couldn't say damn on the air or hell.
But you see, today radio stations are owned by corporations.
Yeah.
And the corporations are answerable to stockholders. And, you know, it's all about money, profits, and this and that. And so, you know, they're just little widgets. You know, that's all they are. You know, and the people running radio stations today are not people that love music or even love radio. They're just, you know, they're businessmen. and they're managing hundreds of stations all over the country. You know?
Now, on your website, you have a wish list. What are just a couple of your wishes?
Well, as I said, one of my wish lists would be more local radio, more locally owned stations.
And WHFS to go back to progressives, probably not.
Or at least some kind of a little more enlightened version. I'm not naive enough to think we'll ever get back to the way WHFS used to be. But it would be nice if someone were to come along and say, you know, we're going to have a nice rock station or a nice big band station or whatever, and it's going to have local personalities on it, and we're going to let them kind of a little bit of an influence, let them play kind of what they want, seat of the pants kind of thing, you know, and let the station sound like a local station. You know, we talk about how bad things are in radio today. You know, one of the good things is the internet. I mean, all of a sudden now, folks, individuals can get up there and have a platform and be up there with the big guys. I can get up there as one person and compete with the Washington Post. When was that ever possible, that one person could do that? You know, it's amazing. You know, today, one person can start a radio station. You know, if you want to go on the internet and promote it, you can start your own station.
Does anybody listen to those stations?
Well, that's the question. You know, you got to get promoted. You got to fight for your audience, that kind of thing. You know, so, you know, sometimes they do. You know, there are a number of internet-only radio stations that do very, very well. And the other nice thing about the internet is that you can listen to radio. There are good radio stations out there for the rock music genre. WXRT in Chicago is a wonderful radio station. BBC Radio 6 is a wonderful radio station. There are cool radio stations around the country, and you can listen to them on the internet. Now, what's going to blow everybody away is in a couple years, very soon, we're going to have an easy way to get internet delivered to your car, okay? Can you imagine now, you're going to have a car radio, and on that radio dial, you can listen to any radio station anywhere in the world. You can listen, you know, because you'll be able to listen to via the internet, because it's coming in via the internet into your car radio. Now, all of a sudden now, you know, car radios basically is where radio, if it wasn't for cars, who knows what would happen to radio today. That's where most radio listening is done. But can you imagine what it's going to do to local broadcasters when all of a sudden now you'll be able to hear music from anywhere? I think what broadcasters are seeing now is they're saying, we already realize that people are going to be able to get their music anywhere. But news and talk and local stuff like what WTOP is doing, there's always going to be a demand for that. I mean, you're still going to need to know the traffic. You're still going to need to know the local weather. You're still going to need to know, you know, the local headlines. And so what I think in the future you're going to have is a couple of stations like a WTOP, a talk station, a few stations like that. But I think you'll be able to get music from anywhere. You know, you will, you know, you're not going to have to listen to WASH anymore. If you want, you can listen to a station in New York or LA or in Paris.
I want to tell our listeners that you have a plan for how you would remix all the different stations and utilize them, and I think they should go to your website and read that. That's typical of what's so good about your website.
Well, you know, I think to some degree, I think I may inhibit that because a lot of radio people go to my website and then they see my suggestions and they go, I'm not taking the advice of some crazy old guy working in his underwear. I really think that. I think they think that. And they just say, I'm not going to do what he says.
Well, if a change occurs, we're going to credit you.
Thank you very much. That's half the battle right there, you know.
I'll tell you.
Think this guy's great?
He is.
Boy, does he love what he's doing, and he's doing it. That's a real service.
Yes. Oh, mercy. You know, the only thing even close to your website, back in my day, I'm talking about the 50s and the 60s, was Broadcasting Magazine.
Oh, yeah. I was always a big fan of them. Sure, yeah.
Are they still around?
Yes, on the internet, sure, yeah. Oh, yeah, they have broadcasting, and they're called Broadcasting and Cable. Broadcastingandcable.com. Sure, it's still a really good website.
But it's nothing like yours.
Well, they don't it's not really local. It's you know, basically national issues that cover broadcasting.
And tell us your website, because Lee can't seem to get the letters.
DCRTV.com.
DCRTV.com. See, right. I can do it.
You did it.
I'm a quick learner.
I love it too when I'll get written up by somebody once in a while and they get it wrong. DRCT, whatever. DC Radio Television, DCRTV.
Yes. I think we're being told we need to wrap it up, Lee.
I think so. I think so. But this has been just fascinating.
Thank
Dave,
you.
thank you very much for sharing.
It's been a pleasure.
Sharing your knowledge with our audience.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, audience, for joining us on Out of the Past. We'll be back.